A man in an iron lung who wishes to lose his virginity contacts a professional sex surrogate with the help of his therapist and priest. Mark needs heavy machinery to maintain a normal life, but he can't move or roll over. He also has a cat in his house. A woman comes to Mark's house in the morning. Joan is a very strong caregiver. Joan has to scrub Mark's body every day and take Mark out for a walk. Mark would love to have a bed where he can exercise on his own. This life is too inconvenient. Mark came to church. His fate was a joke from the Lord. The pastor he knew had left the area. The new pastor talked to Mark. Mark said he wanted to fire his current caregiver, Joan, because Joan's eyes were too sharp. Even though he was the boss, he felt embarrassed. The pastor told him to go with his feelings and fire her. So a new caregiver came and named Amanda. Amanda was very good looking and always smiling gently, but Mark's presence interfered with Amanda's relationship with her boyfriend. After all, the job involves physical contact. Mark, who had never been in love before, developed a hint of desire while being cared for by Amanda. It was something he hadn't felt in over 20 years. That day he said to Amanda, "I love you," but he didn't get a response. Mark expressed his desire to marry Amanda, but Amanda left. It's human nature, so it is normal to get unsatisfactory results. But Mark has a basic desire. The pastor thought Mark might want to talk to a therapist. Soon after Amanda left, a new caregiver arrived. Susan called Mark and said there was a writing topic that would be perfect for Mark: desire and body dysfunction. This was the reality of Mark's situation. Mark talked to several people with physical disabilities at home. Desire was unreachable for them. Once again, Mark came to church to talk to his pastor. He found a psychiatrist who specializes in desire and physical disorders. But he was off duty, so he was pushed by the caregiver. The psychiatrist said it was unlikely that Mark's fantasies would be fulfilled. After all, Mark couldn't get real feelings even if he was capable of sex now. The doctor suggested that Mark find a counseling room to help Mark, and the pastor didn't agree because it is not in accordance with the rules of the church. But as a friend, he couldn't refuse Mark. He said that God should be merciful for you. Go ahead and do it. The pastor took Mark's hand and prayed for him. Cheryl got a call. She also had a teenage son. Mark's friend reached out to Cheryl. Cheryl called Mark and offered to meet him. They set up a time. Cheryl asked some questions about Mark's health. Soon the time came. Mark was a little nervous and scared. He was taken by the caregiver to a friend's house. It wasn't time for the appointment yet. Mark was nervous all the time. He was afraid Cheryl would turn around and leave the moment she saw him. Soon the doorbell rang. Cheryl arrives. She greeted Mark. The nurse left with good sense. Cheryl said she wasn't like a sex worker. She's not doing this for money, but for Mark's therapy and counseling. Mark speaks a little fast. Cheryl talks to Mark to ease his nerves. As Cheryl slowly undresses Mark, Mark is physically aware. Cheryl says if you feel pain, please tell her gently and calmly. Mark is a special patient. Cheryl felt some pressure and went to the bathroom to calm down. Then she laid down next to Mark and made out with him. Mark was feeling good, so he soon felt the pleasure. He describes the passion to the priest, but the priest was clearly at a loss for words. He and Cheryl agreed on a time to meet next. The nurse went and picked up Mark and took him home. Mark was in a good mood. He even joked with the caregiver. Cheryl returned home to record the day's therapy on a tape recorder. She rested next to her husband. She said Mark was stuck in a bed for life and couldn't stand up. He was forever dependent on a machine to breathe. The husband had fallen asleep without saying anything. Mark met with Cheryl again. He was afraid to look Cheryl in the eye. The pastor was embarrassed when he heard these things, and Cheryl joked that it only meant he was attractive. Mark's fantasy is actually a form of self-abuse. He feels he's not capable of sex, so he's in a constant state of self-doubt. Mark thinks he had something to do with his sister's death. Family reasons have kept him from having the right attitude toward women. He would dress up before entering Cheryl and wears perfume. This day they heard a lot of laughter outside the house. His friend's house was having a party, so he had to go to a hotel. The hotel staff was extraordinarily kind when they saw Mark, who was paralyzed. He allowed them to use the hotel room for 2 hours only. The caregiver and the receptionist were talking. He laughed out loud in disbelief when he heard that Mark was receiving physical counseling. Mark talks about his family. He used to make his sister cry, so when his sister died, he was in a lot of pain. Mark's illness ruined his family's life. At this point, Mark closed his eyes by following Cheryl's lead. He imagines he is playing with his sister on a beach. He stepped on the soft sand and forgot about his illness. The sound of Cheryl going to the bathroom caught Mark's attention. He felt like he was in a waterfall. It was cool and exciting. Cheryl's family isn't that great either. After all, life is for everyone to live. The pastor was used to talking to Mark about such topics. When Mark and Cheryl were asked what they thought of each other, they both enjoy spending time with each other a little bit. Cheryl didn't say anything to her husband at home when he asked her questions. That day, Mark asked Cheryl to meet him for a cup of coffee. Mark had a crush on her. They started seeing each other more often. Mark thought Cheryl could replace many women in his life and set him up. Mark was a very funny and gentlemanly man. He is a poet. His thoughts are full of romance and poetry. He sent a letter to Cheryl, but Cheryl's husband saw it. The two of them quarreled. Cheryl's son didn't know what was going on. He had to act as a messenger between them at the dinner table. At night, the husband talked about a beautiful poem in the letter. There were no fancy words in the poem, but it was full of emotion. Cheryl couldn't resist. She went through the trash in the middle of the night and read the poem. Amanda, the previous caregiver, suddenly appeared in front of Mark. She said she was leaving for Germany soon, so she came to say goodbye to Mark. Mark said why she chose to go to Germany. He was so funny and entertaining that Amanda loved him. Amanda was sad and in tears. This man could always make her laugh. But in the end, she left. Mark also thanked Amanda for bringing him a different feeling, and the receptionist and caregiver had a subtle bond over several interactions. Paralyzed Mark and Cheryl continue their therapy exercises in the room. This time, both people got serious about their emotions. Mark almost broke down in tears. Cheryl sensed Mark's emotional longing for her. Mark sensed he was about to fall into grief. There were 2 more sessions after the sex therapy session, but Cheryl said their sessions could be over because Mark had completed the therapy, and Cheryl's words revealed that she was refusing to be with Mark. She couldn't respond to Mark's affection for her. To Cheryl, Mark was only a patient. He was a visitor in her life. When she was about to leave, Cheryl cried out when she received the money from the caregiver. This kind of goodbye made Cheryl sad too, but even if it was the right decision to stop the undeserved feelings. However, it was impossible for them both to forget this experience. The day the power went out suddenly, Mark's oxygen machine stopped working, and he couldn't get through to his friend. His breathing could only hold him for 2 or 3 hours. Mark thought his life was about to stop. He was taken to the hospital. He woke up and said he was dying at the moment. He was complaining about the unfairness of fate. When someone arrived, she was like a light that illuminated a dark tunnel. This experience led Mark to meet a woman, Vera. He told Vera everything that was on his mind. She was the love of his life. They wrote love letters to each other and expressed their love for each other. 5 years later, Mark died. He was finally relieved of the unfairness of his fate. He was happy, even though he was trapped in a body that couldn't move. But he had a fun and lively soul. Vera read Mark's poem at the memorial service. The poem was his most heartfelt words to Cheryl, whom he had loved, and to Vera, whom he loved last. This film is a tribute to Mark O'Brien. He left no regrets in his short life of a few decades. The film explores life and death, humanity, faith and redemption. The director's interpretation of these big, heavy issues makes the characters very likable. The film shows Mark's personality. Everyone has the right to pursue what they want. Desire is common to all. There is no shame in pursuing desires. Everyone is born equal, even for people with physical disabilities. At the same time, this desire also changes and influences Mark's life.